like the ayah in Surah Al-Imran, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Imran, you are the best of peoples, evolved for mankind, enjoining what is right, forbidding what is wrong, and believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and Amr bil Maroof wa Nahy anil Munkar, and enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong really needs good, powerful institutions to be behind it, to enact this social change. So how can we get our institutions to do this part that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ordained in us, inshallah, in the best possible manner that really attract the community towards these institutions and have everyone involved in this social change. And Brother Rami, if you can introduce yourself shortly, and then inshallah, so everyone can.
Yeah, absolutely. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نشهد أن محمد رسول الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum everybody. Very honored, very privileged to be presenting to you all. Jazakallah khair for making it to this session. I know there's a lot of outstanding sessions, but I really appreciate your efforts and your intentions in being in this session. So Sister Benevent is a part of our Oak Tree Institute team, so I want to talk a little bit about Oak Tree Institute and my role within Oak Tree. So we're a nonprofit organization very focused on developing the leaders and organizations that serve our community. We're a nonprofit, as we always say, we're a nonprofit that serves our nonprofits. And specifically, our focus for the past 7+ years has been on the leadership and management practices for our institutions, those that serve the Muslim community. Specifically, Executive Director of Oak Tree, and I've been, alhamdulillah, for the past 4.5 years. I've had the honor and privilege to train, consult, coach, work with hundreds of different organizations and many, many different leaders. And I think we saw that this opportunity, the conference, the convention, was a good forum, a good opportunity to talk about some of the best practices and some of the things that how we rethink our institutions, how we rethink our masajid, our centers, and how they should be governed and managed going into the future. And that's kind of the intention of why we asked the convention to put this session on. I'll speak a little bit about the importance of the masjid first and foremost. I think the very first masjid that ever existed was, anybody know what the first masjid was? We'll make this conversation as much as possible. What was the first masjid on earth? Good answer before that. Masjid Masjid Qiba. Good answer, but not correct. What's the first masjid on earth? Yes, mashallah. The first masjid ever was the masjid established by Ibrahim alayhi salam, which we now today call Mecca, or the Haram, or the Kaaba. All of them are that first masjid that Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail built. When they are building the building, or building the center, that would eventually be, today, Mecca, the Kaaba, is the center of the entire Ummah. Right? All our hearts, faces, and souls face the Kaaba when we were praying to Allah Azza wa Jal, in our du'as and our prayers, etc. Ibrahim alayhi salam laid the foundation of that masjid. Adam alayhi salam laid the foundation. Ibrahim alayhi salam built the masjid itself. I bring that up because the institution of the masjid, of course, Ibrahim alayhi salam, in Mecca by himself, just him and his son and his family, no one there, and Ibrahim alayhi salam makes the call for people to come to this place. And Ibrahim alayhi salam leaves behind this institution, amazing institution, that would eventually serve and continue to serve millions of believers that would come after him. Right? Millions of believers. The masjid is the heart. The Prophet, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, he laid the foundation of the heart of the community, which is the masjid. The first action of the Prophet, as soon as he got to Medina, was he built the masjid. So this center, this masjid, this place, this building, is supposed to be the heart of the community, the center of the community. Our reality is, alhamdulillah, as a growing Muslim community for several decades now, for some communities, and for most of the immigrant community, it's been several, probably the past 50, 60 years, we've had this blooming amount of institutions. Today, at least the current research says, we have over 2,900 masajid in the United States. Just to give you context, there are over 300,000 churches in the United States. So we are, a small percentage in the greater institutions of religious practices, community centers, etc. But where we struggle today, the reality of where we are today and where we need to move forward, I think is where our discussion will be in this session. Because I think, and hopefully we'll make this very conversational, we'll almost do this in an interview style. But there are three main things I want us to focus on as our community buildings get bigger and the number of people that go to them get bigger. There has to be a shift in mindset, in approach, and in practice of how our institutions manage and govern themselves. There has to be that shift. In our maturity, we're still in those rough patches, but there has to be that shift. So what are those shifts? And I'll start with the first one, Sister Mervat, which is, number one, first and foremost, the ideal message or the ideal institution. It has a collaborative, aligned, effective leadership across the organization. I'll say that again. It's a long phrase. But what we've seen from our work with many organizations is when an organization has a collaborative approach that is aligned across the leaders at each level, there is effectiveness in the messaging. There's effectiveness in the center. So the three levels, at least at Oak Tree Institute, we break them down to three levels. What are the three levels that every effective nonprofit, but particularly the masajid, our centers, what are the three levels that they have? What are the three levels in any organization? Can anybody tell me what's the most senior level?
Board of Trustees.
Generally, it is a board. Some institutions call them Board of Trustees. Some institutions call them Board of Directors. Some call them both. Some call them Advisory Council. The names don't matter, right? But it's that senior most level in an organization, the highest level of leadership, if you will, in a nonprofit. Very good. What's the middle level? Sometimes it doesn't even exist. Generally, it's an executive body of some sort. Ideally, in most masajid, that's usually given as a board of directors or a body of directors, a committee of directors. But generally, we would say an executive team, an executive director, a board of directors, people that are managing the day-to-day operations, programs, services of the masjid. Then there's the third layer, which is, or the last layer, which is our staff and volunteers. Our staff and volunteer body, particularly those that serve day-to-day our community, they're the most community-facing or community-serving body. They have a level that they need to serve as well. So what I said was, these three levels, when they are collaborative, aligned, and effective in their roles and responsibilities, there's a tremendous impact that the community does. And so I want to speak a little bit to this in a little bit. So I'm going to get double click here, if you will. Okay. So let's talk about first this board level. Let me talk a little bit about teamwork first, Sister Mervat. So teamwork is when a team, being a part of a team, is that everybody on the team does what they are supposed to do. And anytime somebody on the team, again, bad analogy, but it's football season, and I play football and I love football, so it's just a quick analogy, okay? If you don't understand it, that's okay. But everybody on a team, a football team, has a role to play. People that block need to block. People that pass need to pass. People that run and catch need to run and catch. If somebody blocking wants to run and catch, it becomes very problematic. The person trying to throw the ball gets killed by the other team. If somebody that's running and catching wants to block, the person that's throwing the ball doesn't know where to go. So there's a part of it being a collaborative team is everybody's going to do their job. And you're going to focus on, as best as possible, doing what you are responsible for. A lot of times our institutions don't do that. Hence, there's misalignment, lack of collaboration, and lots of inefficiencies. Because, simple example, a board is supposed to be responsible for a few things. Amongst them is the greater direction of where the organization or the community is trying to go. Once a board, as I talked to, trained up, I won't mention any names just because they're recording and and we're all good brothers and sisters together. But a board member we were doing a training for said, Brother Rabi, it takes us 3 weeks of sending emails to pass a $500 phone bill as a board. Because a board, focus on vision, strategy, all these important things, is micromanaging the $300-400 phone bill that someone needs to pay. Would we say that they're doing their role and responsibility? No, they're not. Their role and responsibility is something different from what they're actually doing. So it creates a what? An inefficiency in the dynamic of the organization and the community. The people that are working, the people that are serving, the people that are doing. On the other side as well, again, I'm giving some examples. We have some very influential staff members in our communities. I'll give, just as for the sake of example, a staff member that most masajid hire is the imam. The imam at times, and again, we get the stories unfortunately, but the imam becomes so influential in the community, which is generally is a good thing. So influential that as an individual contributor or a leader in the community, they can no longer be managed or governed by the board, which creates also a very hard, challenging dynamic in the community. And so we see when there isn't clear roles and responsibilities across the levels, when there isn't clear focus and direction and energy, that misalignment, those lack of a collaborative approach creates a lot of problems in the community. And typically, I believe, we have more, this is not database, this is anecdotal completely, but I believe we have more lawsuits in masajid and communities than we do have strategic plans for communities that are written and documented. And that's a sad reality. The reality is that more than not, communities are, their management and governance practices creates major, it's not just inefficiency, it creates major conflict and infighting even. And so we have to, I think, overcome this hurdle. And I have a few things that I want to address and how to do that. But the first point in my opinion is this idea of being a collaborative organization at each level that has clear roles and responsibilities that it plays. That will create the greatest impact.
Amazing points, Mark. I just want to remind the audience, inshallah, that we have 10 minutes at the end of the session, inshallah, for questions, and inshallah, we'll allow the time for Brother Rami to answer them, inshallah. So Brother Rami is amplifying for talking about, like hitting that, critical point of roles and responsibilities. But how about, the high turnover in our masajid and Muslim institutions, that it's sometimes called that it's not welcoming for good talents. Our youth and young professionals, they don't find their spaces or spots for them in the hierarchy of those institutions. So how would you advise us?
Yeah, great question. So I think I think that everybody's probably heard, how many people I know in professional life, people have heard of the Great Resignation. Sure, that's a term that's been very popular since COVID. The concept of people leaving their corporate jobs, the new flexibility in the way the world of work is operating. I think we have, I don't want to say it's worse than that, but I think we have a bigger problem of resignation operating within Muslim nonprofits. I think we have a major crisis. I think sometimes communities know their issues, but when you work with so many communities, you see the trends across different parts, not just different parts of the country, but the entire country, many times. We have a major crisis in losing talented people that want to work for our community. Now, let's think about this together. If we believe that serving Allah Azza wa Jalla and the community work, the things that we do, the youth work, the outreach work, the mental health work, the feeding the poor, feeding the needy, taking care of kids, right? There are so many critical things that need to be done. And I always tell our community leaders, look, nonprofits operate in a space that no one will ever serve if you don't serve them. So the private sector exists to make money generally, services and product services for money. The public sector makes sure that your streets are plowed and the lights work and kids have school. But that middle sector, well, who saves my kid? Who helps my kid with their iman? Who helps my daughter with her depression? Who's going to support the homeless in our neighborhood? Who's going to help the drug addicts that are the addictions that are rampaging through our communities? Well, only nonprofits will serve that cause. No company's going to come do it, and more than likely, I mean, particularly the faith-based thing, the government is not going to come help your kids' iman and their Quran health. So nonprofits exist for that space. Now, the challenge is, if all the really talented, ambitious, motivated, smart, wonderful people that we need to serve our community leave our institutions, so who's left to serve them? We have a major crisis. Now, I think that crisis, first and foremost starts for particularly those that are board members in here. I think you probably know. It starts with our religious leadership. I think more and more, particularly as millennials, and I talk to a lot of them, and we know a lot of them, millennial imams, Gen Z imams are coming into the community. They're not as apropos to stick around with the inefficiencies of a board, the mismanagement, the micromanagement, the overmanagement of an institution. Like, why do I need to deal with this? How can I live a career, provide for my family, and do this long term? So we have a longevity issue. Second thing is, we have a crisis in reality. It's like, okay, when we get a talented youth director, or a talented religious imam, or an outreach director, whatever it might be, or even Sunday school teachers, we also have the second problem of, well, do they believe that they can stay with us as a career moving forward? Like, do we have the means, the mechanisms, the resources? And sometimes we have the resources, but have we created the path forward moving to them? So the second really big challenge is, can they stay with us long term? Are we bringing in the best people, and can they stay with us? And for the most part, whether they're imams down to youth directors, our institutions are bleeding talent. What does that do? Well, generally, and I think I've been there, so I can communicate to you all, and all of us as leaders have probably been there. When you lose amazing people for a year, 2 or 3, and you don't fill that gap, there's a generation of kids, youth, adults that's lost, that's very, very hard to get back. So you're like, okay, well, we didn't have a youth director for 4 years. Well, you lost 4 years of your Sunday school and youth halqa. They're no longer retained. And by the way, I think people think, a lot of times we think, like, I lose them youth to drugs and I lose them to atheism. Well, of course, that's a loss. Sure, of course, we sometimes are losing them to all the vices and sins of the dunya. Sure, but also it's not just that. We're losing the doctor that can support and donate to the masjid. We're losing the young professional that can build an entire coding program to volunteer. We're losing mentors and guides and youth and volunteers. It's not just we're losing them to just, shaitan. We're also losing them in serving Allah Azza wa Jalla through our buildings. And so it's a bigger crisis than just saying, hey, these people are not here, or we can't retain them. We've got to be able to, and of course I'll give y'all some solutions, inshallah. But there has to be a mindfulness that as institutions, we have to think more long-term about how we create career paths for people that serve our community. Let alone, of course, not just the imams, youth directors, executive directors, but also as we continue to build and ramp up in other areas, outreach coordinators, maybe public relations officers, marketing, counselors. We've got to be able to say, well, how can my center, how can my masjid keep these people with us? We've got to be able to think and act very differently as well. So that's the second point, inshallah, that I want to address. And again, we're going to provide some solutions, I promise, but we're kind of digging into some of the biggest challenges first.
How about the program part? So nowadays our community's expectations have changed. the whole expectation of everyone, when the very high technology that entered everyone, and we're all exposed to, the expectations of the regular community member has been dramatically different. There's so changed in the last 10 years or 5 years even. So how can our masajid really, step up to that expectation and fill in the gap with creating good programs that really make people proud of being of not only gaining the benefit as customers or as the receiving end, but also for the volunteers and the teachers and the other community members to be involved and able to engage in these programs as well.
Excellent question. It brings us to our third biggest crisis that institutions are dealing with. This third one is, Sister Maroof, to your point, and I know our team talks about this a lot, is human-centered, human-designed programs and services. I think there's been a generational inheritance that a masjid does specific ways of service and programs. It's like, okay, hey, I want to bring everybody think, hey, I want to bring my middle schooler to the masjid. I send her to the masjid. What do you think she gets in the masjid? Just what kind of program do you think she gets? Malik. What kind of program do middle schoolers get in the masjid? They get a lecture. Okay? Let's go to high school. You have a high school son or daughter, 17 years old. They go to the masjid. What kind of program are they going to get? They're going to get a lecture. Okay, we have young professionals that come to the masjid. They're coming to the center. They're going to walk in, they're going to come for a lecture. You have fathers and mothers that want to come on a Friday night. They drop their kids off. Maybe there's something fun for the kids to do on a Friday night in the masjid or the center. But they're going to come and they're going to attend a lecture. So everybody, and then of course khutbah, we're going to have a lecture. After salah, we're going to have a lecture. During Ramadan, we have a lecture. So our entire design of programs and services as masjids, not all, I know I'm generalizing, but for the most part, from when they're 5 or 4 to Sunday school, to when they're 85, our service is a lecture. And so there is no greater thought, mindfulness of, well, how do we design programs and services that actually support the development, the nurture, the care of every type of individual that comes to our center. Programs that go above and beyond and just kind of like, let's just walk in and let somebody to talk to them, to a program that actually thinks about what are their challenges and needs and how do we address them in unique and dynamic ways. Right? We all know the most outstanding centers, masjids, they're very dynamic in the way they try to resolve problems. Now, of course, there's always room for improvement. But just the fact that they have, it's something simple and silly, but they have a sleepover for the youth. For most masajid, and I know maybe a few elders in here said they gasped. Like, what do you mean sleepover in the masjid? What do you mean? With pajamas? And what are they going to do? But what I mean is no, we're going to try to serve our youth on a Christmas long winter break by them spending more time in the masjid in a different way, in a more dynamic way. The concept being, hey, what is my audience? And how do I design different kinds of program services that serve them? Now again, we can go up and down the tier, but from 5, 6-year-olds, what are their needs and how do we nurture those needs in our masajid? What are the middle schooler needs? Very different than high schoolers. They're different than college students and young professionals. They're different than adults. Maybe there's different ethnicities. Uzbekis are different than the Urdu speaking, and different than the Arab speaking, different than the Turkish speaking, different than the Somali speaking. So all of a sudden, when we aren't thinking about the people we serve and design based on that, we are creating a major kind of canyon in the actual value our masajid bring. What's the value of the masjid? If the masjid doesn't think about me when I enter it. By the way, I will give many prophetic models, but the Prophet was wonderful at giving people, designing and talking to people at their level. And so, I think that's the third thing is I'll grab some water.
So, Barakallah Feek for listing or really reminding us of these challenges, and now I believe we're all ready to really get your insight on how can we make those masajid, inshallah, more human-centered and really serve our community with ihsan, and the three major points that you listed here, inshallah.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the first point. The first point was really teamwork in the organization. A leadership across each level that has, being leaders, but across each level. There's different roles. At the top level, I'll list them, but we can talk about them in the Q&A. At the top level for boards, there's really three main things we outline as best practices for board of trustees, advisory boards, even a board of directors of some sort. There's three critical practices. The first is the long-term health of the organization. And I know for most boards there's a 2-year or 4-year turnover. But that's okay. Even within that term, your focus should be on that landscape. Like, hey, what is generally the body of this community, our masjid, what is the heart of it? What is our values? What are we trying to do? The long term of the community. That should be the primary focus for a board. The second is, I'll talk about the easier one, is oversight of the organization. The board is not supposed to be working in the organization. They're supposed to be working on the organization. I'll say that again, because it's a little complex. A board is not supposed to be working in the organization. I decide what color napkins at the banquet. I decide which AT&T or T-Mobile. We're deciding all these really inefficient, unimportant things. If you're doctors and brothers and sisters and you're senior, you've been in the community for a while, you've been in the organization, focus on what's critical to the organization. The legal responsibilities, the governance responsibilities, the financial responsibilities, the human resource responsibilities. There are things that the board must be focused on that are the oversight of the organization. The last thing, and I think this is particularly, and I know there's different levels of masajid, but generally what we see is boards that are successful empower an executive body to be able to lead. They have to trust the executive body, I'm sure. I'll get to that. There's confidence involved. But they have to trust an executive presence to take care of the work day to day. I think if you are part of an organization that is $1 million plus in an annual budget, you should have a hired executive director and hired staff. I think that's the level of maturity that we want to talk about. If you're a middle or smaller masjid, you want to empower a youth director, an imam. You want to empower someone that is nurturing and raising and developing the community. So you have to empower people, and we'll talk about what that means, of course, in the Q&A, I'm sure. But you have to empower them to trust them to lead the day-to-day of the community, not to micromanage, if you will. So that's a board. For the middle tier, I said, okay, if I'm an executive director, a youth director, if I'm a board of BOD, I'm a board of director, I'm in charge of outreach, pace, outreach, whatever day-to-day programs and services. If I'm a director in a masjid, my job is, number one, to align to the greater vision of the board. I have to be clear. Like, hey, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to attack homelessness? Are we trying to attack the youth? What are we trying to do? Because if you're doing everything, you're really doing nothing. And a lot of times boards want us to do everything. But really, in reality, we can focus on 3 to 5 main things. And let's do them with ihsan before we can grow. So if we say youth, okay, we're going to focus on youth. But then the question then is, number 2 is, the biggest challenge with executives is, or the middle leadership, is they always want to do it themselves. They want to build teams. You will find a really high-performing sister that's a youth director. She's a one-man army. Brother, one-man army. Imams, one-man army. Operations manager, facility manager, one-man army. Sunday school teachers, one-man army. Everybody wants to be a one-man army. And the reality is their inability to learn to build and manage volunteers and teams is their biggest downfall. They are unable to build the capacity around them. Now, of course, we could say, well, board should help with that. I mean, sure. But I believe, and obviously what we train in OTI, is we train them to actually build teams around them. Build effective teams. Leverage, delegate, bring people on, empower yourself too. Because the work cannot sustain long term if you don't. Their third thing is, going back to my design, being very clear in who they want to serve and how. If I meet with a youth director, just really quickly, alhamdulillah, we do a lot of training, consulting, coaching. I was able to go, we have great youth work. And I go into the masjid, and they're like, yeah, we do all the youth work in the community. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Your masjid serves the 10% of youth that come to the masjid. Jazakallah khair. Don't tell me you're serving youth. That's not serving youth. You're serving the youth, most likely of parents, that bring their youth to the masjid. And that's great, and that's fine, but that's not telling me I'm serving the youth of the community. No, that's not it. When we say you are learning to design programs, it's like I'm learning to design. I know that I need programs for the youth that come to the masjid. But when there's youth that don't come to the masjid and they're dealing with drug overdoses or depression, you're not putting up a flyer in the masjid for them to come. If I have a junk food restaurant, I don't go to the nicest gym in town and put the flyer up. Right? It doesn't make any sense. If I'm selling pizza and fried chicken, I don't go to the nicest masjid in the city and put up my flyer. Similarly, if you put up a flyer for, I'm just giving an example, drug awareness for youth, those kids are not coming to the masjid. So you have to think more critically about how you're serving, who you're serving, and how you're serving them is my point, right? So leaders get caught up we get so caught up in what we can do that we forget about the other parts of what we're not doing. And so I think that's the critical mistake for leaders generally in that middle tier. The last tier, staff and volunteers. Staff and volunteers, they're responsible for primarily, number one, excellence in serving people. They are the ones in the fire every day. I guarantee you, brothers and sisters, particularly if you're a part of a leadership team here, your reception and your security has a much more important impact on the masjid than you do as a board. The people that do parking in the masjid for your Jum'ah, they have a much greater impression on the impact of the masjid than the best executive director. Because they are the community face day to day. And so when they don't get trained to communicate with excellence, deal with challenges, be able to excel in the way they serve people, you know what? Your masjid will always have a stigma and a reputation that will grow. So that's really important for staff and volunteers. They have to be excellent in being directly dealing with and nurturing the community. So that's the roles and responsibilities alignment that we like to say. When they all come together, I believe that our institutions can go to the next level. I want to quickly answer because we'll open the Q&A. The second part, which is the problem of retaining talent. I said our second big crisis, so number one, working as a team, everybody doing their job. The second one we've seen in our practice is when our communities are truly invested in the long-term growth of the town that they have. So I really urge you all, if you're a leader in a masjid or you have influence in a community, when you have really good people, think about all the ways that you can keep them. Companies, they know that the pain of paying for people, somebody leaving my company and replacing them is a major pain. Companies invest billions of dollars into really effective hiring practices and retention of the people that come to them. Our masajid don't want to pay $3,000 for a training for an executive team. It's very problematic, right? If we don't understand not just attracting the talent, that's one thing, but we want to keep them, we want to develop them, we want to nurture them. Already, I think we all know, okay, you're going to sacrifice financially, you're going to sacrifice benefits, you're going to sacrifice in order to be here. But then on top of all those sacrifices, you're not going to develop me, you're not going to support me, you're not going to help nurture and raise me, so why should I stick around? Every generation, I think millennials are definitely asking those questions, and every generation after them will ask the question because they have more choices than previous generations. By the way, it's a major talent issue. The new generations have more options. And I think as masajid, as community members, as community leaders, we've got to ask, well, if they could go to that company as opposed to me, how am I going to get them to stay here? We've got to think more holistically about the value add of being a part of a nonprofit, particularly long term. And again, we talk about different practices and different things like that. Hopefully it can come up in the Q&A. I think those are the two main ones that, at least for now, that we can address in our conversation.
So to your point of retaining talent, I believe, I don't know, but it's my opinion, my mere opinion, based on the experience that I had with this Muslim organizations. That subhanAllah, once you find the right person with the right intention and with good amount of qualifications and backgrounds of the professional, like the role that they're playing, I think it's good for us to look at it as the mujtahid, darajat al-mujtahid, like the ones who really try to do their best. If they do one good, they get 2 rewards. If they don't do the right thing, at least they were there, they're filling in the position, they're trying to do their best, and there comes your role as an organization to really develop them, to train them, to get to that right performance that you're expecting from them. But really, losing talent, and the word that you're using, I believe it's very expressive, bleeding talent from our Muslim organizations, really it's not helping our communities whatsoever. So let's inshallah open the floor for Q&A. And I would really appreciate if you have any questions, come and just introduce yourself, and if you can share with us on which level are you involved, if you are involved at any level of the organization.
Yeah, feel free to come up, or you can raise your hands either way, either approach.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Laith. Currently, I've resigned from my current position as I went to work for the city now. But in my previous nonprofit, I was operations and events. And so, like you said, I was really, the face of the organization, and the community would see me all the time. But it got to a point where it kind of like the administration, I wasn't really, aligning with their view of the organization, and it kind of really got micromanaging a lot, and I just had to resign. At this point, me and a colleague now, we're trying to develop a nonprofit with our own vision. And like you said, you brought up a point where you said the board works on the organization, not in the organization. Now, if we're starting a nonprofit now, how does that structure look, and what exactly do we have to do to kind of develop it and get funding for that kind of organization?
Sure, so that's a great question about how to start a nonprofit. So Jazakallah khair for the question, I appreciate it. By the way, I literally, a brother called me last week, youth director, very effective in the masjid, decided he can't stay in the masjid, decided to make his own nonprofit, and decided to build his own youth organization in the community outside the masjid. And so he asked me the same question, which is, where do I start? How do I go? What happens? I think, number one, let's first pin this point of, I think our institutions have to realize that people don't need to operate underneath us. So again, going back to the leadership teams of the senior level, there are so many options for serving the community now. And so when our masajid, and I think this is my worry is, our masajid, they get so mismanaged that people run somewhere else to build a platform of serving the community, right? So this is again, a symptom of a greater issue. Generally though, nonprofits generally should operate, first of all, we can go through the steps, and we do help some nonprofits with some of the basics. But generally, nonprofits are community institutions. So you need community members that come in and support your organization. I think you can obviously should file with your state. Every state has some different laws, but you can file simply online. Generally you want some kind of governance structure, bylaws, some kind of constitution that guides the organization, mission, vision, statement, things of that sort. Then you establish your organization. Obviously, maybe we can talk offline how to, the other steps, but every kind of nonprofit, just like a company, starts at different levels, and there are different steps to take to work on the organization.
Best of luck for you, inshallah.
Yes, hand in the back. Go ahead. Yeah, you can come up, or if you're loud enough, go ahead and ask it.
Assalamu alaikum. It was like for the nice lecture. A lecture again. So my name is Kamil Samara. I'm from Milwaukee, and I'm like from the tier 2, which is like management level. Many complaint we hear from the community members is about the elections. Some masajid, they don't have elections, which is the power, the hunger for power. Sure. Some people just grip the power and they won't leave it. Sure. Some masajid were like, was built by people. They use their own money. So it's like, oh, we established the masjid, so they stay in power. True, they get donations later on, so that's the people money who's running the masjid, but they stay in power. Yeah. And some masajid, they have elections, but it's like, there's like some loopholes in the elections. Sure. Where they have a committee who decides who will be elected or something like that. So this sometimes repel people from being more involved. I see these people control everything, and sometimes they excuse the other side, which is the people with power, say, oh, we get money, donations, so this means we're successful. Sure. And I think this is like a very dangerous argument, because people give money to the masjid because it's not like any non-profit organization. It's a masjid, where people give, because it's for the sake of Allah. So they use that as an evidence for being successful. Sure. Still get the money. Sure. So if you can speak more about what's the importance of elections, and few people that we choose, and if they choose, they are more involved. Sure. And how is the best way to do a proper election?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Complicated question. A while back there was a masjid, I won't mention the city or the place, but brother gave us a call and said, hey brother, we need you to bring the OG in we have a problem in our community. I was like, okay, what is it? So I said, brother, a group of the board that was on the masjid, they were lawsuit by the community to get out of the masjid. So the lawsuit was there, and then this brother was calling me from the new board, and they said they countered lawsuit us that we took away their authority, and so we want you to come in and resolve, talk to our community about what they can do. So I was like, look, brother, I appreciate it. I was like, well, Khairan, we don't do crisis management, right? We can't help you there. The reality is, I think there's no standard in any institution. So masajid have 1-year terms, 2-year terms, 4-year terms, 100-year terms, and then abad terms, right? There's like never-ending terms. We have major lack of standards. And generally, at least our approach, at OTI, we're a small organization trying to serve. So usually our primary focus is, look, the best practice is the practice the community can get around. Consult a local lawyer, consult some local experts, align your community, make sure everybody's on the same page. Because I think this is the challenge, for the question. First of all, I think generally, our communities don't have historical precedents of leading masajid. So may Allah bless my parents that immigrated, many brothers and sisters that laid the foundations of the institutions. They never led a masjid anywhere else. So there's no historical legacy of leading masajid, ever. Right? In Muslim countries, the government takes care of it. So now I have to bring 7, 9, 12 people. One is Urdu, one is Arab, one is this, one is that, different methodologies, different ideologies, different cultural backgrounds, different ages, and now they got to get together and figure it out. It's very complex. So I have a lot of empathy for our community. It's very hard. It's not a business, it's not my company, it's not my house. I think a lot of people approach it like, this is my business, my company is my house. It's none of that, so it's very challenging. I think the reality of our future is, and I think what we're trying to do is, what is the baseline of good practice? And can we bring that to our community? So it's a very complex problem, for the question. But specifically, I would say every community needs to audit itself consistently. So a good board is always auditing its governance practices, auditing its bylaws, having not just one expert, because I know a lot of times we go to one good brother that we love. But we can go to several experts in an area, even if they're not Muslim, and they can bring you some of the best governance practices of your bylaws, your elections, how the basic fundamentals of how to operate. And then from there, inshallah, just adopt it and move forward. The challenge also is not just having, sometimes some communities have great practices, but we don't orient every generation that comes. And we don't spend the time training, teaching, orienting, and there's not enough historical turnover. So turnover is high. People don't know why we did certain things. And after 4 years, everybody's like, let's revolution. And that spirit is not always healthy. So I wouldn't say it's always good. Sometimes it's needed, sometimes it's not. Really, the context of every community is different. So I would say, bring in professionals to audit the governance practices. Ideally, a set of them, maybe somebody that has a Muslim background. I think that's the good practice. But once it's adopted and the community buys in, just have a reorientation often and tell people the why and what of why decisions were made outside of a few group of people. The donation problem, that's a different problem altogether. No one, Allah says, these masajid are Allah's. Every masjid is Allah's. None of us have any authority in a masjid. And I think the servant leader mindset is really our other problem. Is that people they come in with their great corporate experience, but a corporation is not a masjid. You're a politician, it's not a masjid. A masjid is its own reality. And we need the right mindsets, habits, and practices as we come into leadership. And again, there's not a lot of training that we see. Definitely we can provide that. We definitely provide that professional development for masajid, for boards, for leaders. We can do a lot of that. That is also really important every time new leadership comes in. Wallahu ta'ala. I hope I addressed this.
45 minutes is never definitely enough for such a critical topic like this. But inshallah, Oak Tree is there, alhamdulillah, for tackling these issues and offering the right training and hopefully inshallah, development for leadership and strategic trainings, operational training. So inshallah, you get to benefit from these offerings that Oak Tree offers. Can you tell us?
Yes, so absolutely. So everybody should take, and if you don't know what you should do, again, we're an organization focused on developing leaders and management of our Muslim institution. That's our complete focus. We're very tailored to the dynamics of what we've gone through. Our team is, alhamdulillah, practitioners. They have a strong educational background, and we've been there. So we're bringing these best practices to our community across all the levels. We definitely love for you to reach out to us, have a conversation, have a call. We can have a consultation. We have a variety of different trainings. We have robust trainings for each level, and we can bring that coaching, consultation, support as well to your institution. So reach out to us, inshallah, and I hope and pray that some of these best practices can be brought to your community within that. I'll stick around, Sister Mehra will stick around as well, and again, Brother Zawad, our operations managers in the back, if you have any questions or if you need any further follow-up.
Enjoy the rest of the convention.